Hello and welcome to the second briefing in the series Marketing for Charities, brought to you by the Worshipful Company of Marketors. My name's Peter Rees and today we're going to discuss the topic of marketing planning. I'll start today's briefing by going through the agenda items and the points we're going to discuss. I'm going to start off by revealing to you what is probably marketing's best kept secret. The second section is I've entitled Planning a Fruitcake, and then I'm going to go on and discuss the basic recipe of marketing plans. I'm then going to introduce you to a friend of mine, Paul Smith, and his master recipe. Talk then about a marketing model invented by Paul called SOSTAC, and I'll explain what that means as we get to that section. And then finally I'll explain how we'll handle any questions that you might have for me and give you some few concluding remarks. So let me start as promised by revealing to you marketing's best kept secret. Let me start before I do that by describing something that I noticed about 30 years ago when I started studying marketing in any serious depth. And that was every book you read on marketing planning tells you to do it a slightly different way. The first author gives you a method, and then a few weeks later, a few months later, I'd read a second book and it would tell me to do marketing planning in a different way. And this used to drive me crazy until I finally realised the reality of the situation. There is in fact no correct way to write a marketing plan. Well, let me slightly justify that statement. What I mean is there is no single correct way to write a marketing plan. Every author who writes about marketing plans writes on the basis of their either academic or commercial experience. So for example, if you read a marketing planning book by a friend of mine, Professor Malcolm MacDonald, his marketing plans are based on his experience as the commercial director for Cadbury Schweppes. So his marketing plans are very suitable for companies in the FMCG or the food and drink sector. If on the other hand you read a marketing plan by an academic who I mentioned last time, Professor Philip Kotler, then his marketing plans are based on his experience with large corporations in the United States, originally in the 60s and 70s. So his marketing plans are very much adapted and suited to companies in that kind of business sector. Another marketing author might be, for example, Michael Porter, another US business professor. Michael Porter was originally an economist, and his marketing plans are suitable for large industrialized global corporations because that's the companies he's consulted for and worked with, and his plans are very much based on economic principles, which is the basis of his academic background. So having understood the reality of this basic fact, it occurred to me as I thought about this further that marketing planning is just like baking a fruitcake. And before you think I've taken leave of my senses, let me explain why I say that. If I asked any of you watching this briefing how you'd go about baking a fruitcake, eventually you'd all be able to answer the question. You'd either look in a cookbook, you might actually have a fruitcake recipe in your mind, you might ask a member of your friends or family how they'd go about it, or you might look up a recipe on the internet. But at the end of the day, you'd all be able to give me a recipe and produce a fruitcake to whatever degree of quality. The fact is, whatever method you used, you would all have used the same basic ingredients, which are shown here. Because every fruitcake has within it milk and eggs and sugar and flour and butter and fruit, perhaps with some other spices. And it's the way you blend the ingredients together, it's the different proportions that you use, and it's the amount of time you cook it and how you spice it with extra ingredients to give it the unique flavour for your fruitcake. And in fact, marketing plans have the same characteristics. There are some basic ingredients that go in every marketing plan, and on the next few slides I'll talk about those ingredients for the basic recipe and talk about how one particular individual of my acquaintance developed that idea further. So here is the basic recipe of all marketing plans. As you can see here, they start off with a statement of the mission or purpose of the organisation, and then within the plan itself are 4 steps: analysis, decision, implementation, control. Now I've separated mission and purpose because strictly speaking that's not part of a marketing plan. For a charity, the mission and purpose of the charity is stated either by your articles and memorandum of association or by the chief executive or the board of directors. So it's not something typically that marketing departments can actually modify or change. It's a given. So I've put it outside in a separate coloured box there from the main marketing planning process. The marketing planning process is shown by the lower 4 boxes, and it consists of 4 steps. The first one is analysis, which is understanding where you are in the marketplace today, what's happening in the marketing environment. It's the area of market research or marketplace assessment. Having understood that, you then take some decisions about what you want to achieve in the business and how you might going about achieving it. And that's the area of setting objectives and setting strategies to achieve them. The third step is implementation. This is where you get into the tactical detail, and I'll talk about all these ideas later on in this talk and in subsequent talks. But implementation is about the tactical implementation. It's about marketing communications, service development, fundraising, and the other areas that I talked about in the last briefing. And finally, the last step is to do with control, and that's how to measure the success or the progress of your plan, the achievement of your objectives as you go throughout the year, and what steps you can take to control and measure and analyse the situation to allow you to take corrective action should it be required. So the 4 steps in the basic marketing planning recipe are analysis, decision, implementation, control. And that's analogous in my last example to the basic cake recipe. Analysis, decision, implementation, and control. Before I move on to the next slide though, I'll just point out something which you might find useful in your day-to-day work at the charity, and that is this basic recipe can be the foundation of almost any presentation you're asked to present in a business context. So if your manager asks you to do a presentation on fundraising, if your manager asks you to do a presentation on marketing communications, or if you decide to do a presentation on service development for your charity, then these 4 steps are the good basis in the 4 sections of almost every business presentation, analysing where we are today, deciding what we're going to do about it and what changes are required and what targets we're going to set, putting together an implementation plan and explaining how you're going to control and measure it. So I just put that for your interest as an aside, but it's something you might want to bear in mind, because I found it extremely useful as a sort of cornerstone and a basis on which to build general business presentations. On this next slide, I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine whose name is Paul Smith. He's a noted author, academic, consultant and teacher in the area of marketing planning and nowadays digital marketing and sports marketing also, who when he's writing as an author is known as PR Smith, but the P stands for Paul. And Paul found the same thing that I've described before when he was studying for his MBA, and that is the difference and the diversity of marketing planning processes in different books that he read. So as part of his MBA dissertation, he wrote a sort of unifying approach that brought all of these different methods together, and the way I like to think of it, and I'm sure Paul wouldn't mind me saying this, developed the ultimate cake recipe, the ultimate recipe for marketing planning. And the framework that Paul developed I'm going to introduce on the next slide, and it will be the framework and the basis for future briefings in this series. So thank you very much, my friend Paul Smith. So the planning framework that Paul Smith invented goes by the acronym of SOSTAC, and I'll explain what that means on this slide and talk you through the steps in subsequent slides here and in the briefings to follow. But essentially, SOSTAC is a framework or a model that answers 6 basic questions, which are shown below. And the 6 steps in this model, as you can probably guess, are represented by the letters in the acronym SOSTAC. And the first question that SOSTAC addresses, and the first S of SOSTAC, stands for situation, which asks the question, where are we today? And this, if you like, establishes the start of our marketing journey. Because unless you know where you're starting from, you can't really plan the journey and plan the steps to get to your chosen destination. So the first S of SOSTAC stands for situation. The second letter of SOSTAC is O, which stands for objectives, and this answers the questions, where are we going? So situation establishes the starting point, and objectives state where you want to go at the end of your marketing journey. It's the target, the place you want to arrive to be successful. The next letter in the acronym is another S, and this stands for strategy, which answers the questions, how will we get there? And strategy, as I'll explain later on, is one of the most misunderstood and misused words in marketing today and in business generally. I'll explain why that is and how to think about strategy and formulate strategy correctly. So strategy is how will you get to your chosen destination, or how will you achieve your objectives. The next letter of SOSTAC is T, which stands for tactics, and this is the detailed operational tasks and activities that you undertake to deliver products or services to your chosen markets, which help you to achieve the strategy and fulfill the objectives. So tactics are the details, if you like, of the products and services you might bring to the market, the channels, the routes to market, by which you deliver them, the pricing and the economic background and the business model for your operations, and also marketing communications and how you talk about your products and services and communicate them to target stakeholders. So I'll go into this in more detail in a later lecture, but T is for tactics, the details, which way is best. The A of SOSTAC is a very important step, and that is A for actions, and that summarises essentially who does what and when. And quite often this is a step that's overlooked in many marketing planning literature and many marketing planning textbooks. It's, if you like, the project plan. Who does what, the dates, the times, the resources you need, the budgets, spread over time, and the different actions that need to be undertaken, who's responsible, and how are you going to measure them. So actions is a very important part, and project management is something that I'll talk about in a later briefing when we get onto this step in the process. So the final letter of SOSTAC is C, and that stands for control, and that answers the question, how do we ensure safe arrival? And this is all about the metrics that we put in place. What are we going to measure along the marketing journey throughout the year to make sure that we're on target and on track to achieve our objectives? What analytics and what systems do we need to put in place? How do we report this information, to whom and how frequently? And it's by putting in a good, strong control system we can measure our journey throughout the year and make sure that we are on target to achieve our objectives. And if for any reason we seem to be going off track, it helps us to identify what plans we can put in place to take corrective action and get back on course. Those are the 6 letters of SOSTAC, the 6 questions that they answer, and I'll talk about these in more detail in later briefings. On the next slide I'm going to show you how the basic analysis, decision, implementation and control recipe fits in with SOSTAC. So let me show you how SOSTAC fits together with the basic recipe which I gave you. I said there are 4 steps: analysis, decision, implementation and control, and the genius of Paul Smith's model, SOSTAC, is that it develops some of these and gives more detail in the following way. So we still at the top, you can see, got our mission or purpose statement, which is strictly speaking outside the remit of marketing and marketing planning, but you can see here how the elements of SOSTAC fit and map against the basic recipe of analysis, decision, implementation and control. So from now on and for all future briefings in this series, I'm just going to concentrate on the SOSTAC marketing planning framework. And you can see it here. Mission and purpose, not strictly speaking part of a marketing plan, but important as the basis, and then situation, objective, strategy, tactics, action, control. And I commend to you that you review this slide and if you can memorize it, because this is going to be the basis of all future briefings. So that's nearly brought me to the end of this briefing, and I'm just going to say that in the next briefing we're going to start going through the different sections of SOSTAC, starting with situation, which, as I explained, answers the question about where are we today. So this is the area of marketplace assessment and market research, and I'll give you some ideas and some tools and techniques you can use to achieve that for your charity. So as I said in the first briefing, if you have any questions or any feedback you'd like to give me about this particular briefing talk, then please get in touch by email at the following address, peter.rees@gmail.com. I'd be really happy to hear from you, and I'll answer any questions that I receive as soon as I can after receipt. I'd just like to wrap up then with a few concluding remarks, and in particular one quotation, which I'll show here on the next slide. It's from the author Robert Brow, who wrote, "How often in life we complete a task that was beyond the capability of the person we were when we started it." And it's my hope that by following this briefing series I will give you this capability and these skills to help you in the marketing activities of your chosen charity. So thank you very much for watching. I'd just like to finish by saying thank you for your time. I hope you found today's briefing useful and informative, and I look forward to joining you for the next briefing in due course. I'd just like to wrap up by saying goodbye, good luck and good marketing.